smoking guns that everybody was so hyped up with Ambassador Taylor at the beginning of the week. And then now it's not hardly being talked about because his information he wasn't in the room, he wasn't on the phone call, and he got his information from Ambassador Morrison, who was not in the room, who was not on the phone call, who got his information from Ambassador Sondland, who could have, you don't know what he told him or how, did he exactly say what the president said? So it was all circumstantial and hearsay. So, until it's verifiable facts, I'm not too worried about it. And I'd make a prediction, 3 weeks from now, the smoking gun that everybody was so fired up this week about won't even be talked about.
I believe Tim Morrison was on the phone call, if I remember correctly, based on some of the reporting that we've seen. But yes, we'll just wait and see what happens. I know that Senator Lindsey Graham said all but 3 GOP senators have signed on to this resolution condemning the House inquiry. Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Mitt Romney of Utah. Right. They haven't signed the bill yet. What do you think is holding them back?
You'd have to talk to them. I don't know what reasons they are. I think Senator Romney said he was looking into it. He wanted to get more information. Those are all personal decisions, and with the 50 that have signed on and Vice President Pence, they could move this forward.
Okay, let's talk about Syria here because you're on the Foreign Relations Committee, and CNN crews have seen U.S. military vehicles on the roads. What can you tell us about the plan for some of these mechanics going back into that region?
Well, I think the plan is there's so much chaos in Syria. Nobody has real direct control over Syria. And what happened before, when ISIS was ramping up because of the pullback from the previous administration, they were allowed to train in Libya, the recruitment camps and the training camps. They went into northern Syria, they took hold of that oil, and that's what they were using to fund a large portion of their operation. Nobody was guarding that oil, and so President Trump pulled out the 38 troops in northern Syria, between Syria and Turkey. And he didn't want to leave that oil, through his general's advice, they don't want to leave that oil unprotected, and Syria apparently doesn't have the capacity to protect that. And until somebody comes up and says, all right, we're going to protect this, make sure it doesn't fall in the wrong hands, I'm all for him staying there, but I'm also for getting out of Syria as quick as we can, all U.S. troops.
Okay, so we
need to provide some cover for the Kurds.
You say we need to provide cover for the Kurds. We talked earlier today with former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Bing West, and here's what he had to say. This is a man who has been in combat. Let's hear what he had to say about the mixed messages coming from the White House about Syria.
The troops will always hold the line, as General Mattis says. It's not so much, to me, the troops themselves. It's who's going to fight with us if we walk away from them. And how many of our enemies will look at this and think, well, the United States, they're not so tough. When the tough gets going, they're no longer there.
Are you concerned about our allies having confidence in the reliability of the U.S. to be there when it counts?
Well, I think number one, I think what that person just said is irresponsible. The American military, our American warfighter, is second to none on the planet. And he makes it sound like, they're almost an afterthought or, somebody not to be taken seriously. And I find that pretty offensive. When you talk about our allies, where are the rest of the allies? Why is America the one in the forefront of this? I know we have American leadership around the world, but this is a situation that ISIS is not just an American problem, it's a world problem. All these countries should be in there protecting these oil fields, and they should be making sure that the ISIS fighter does not reconstitute the caliphate and move like they did before. I never want to see people being beheaded on TV again, and that's something that all nations should come together and make sure this doesn't happen.
Real quickly before I let you go, the federal deficit report this morning that the 2019 budget is now $984.4 billion as the federal deficit. It's the highest it's been in 7 years. The Trump administration and the Congressional Budget Office is projecting it's going to hit $1 trillion this year. Is there a plan, Congressman, to try to reduce that deficit that the president in 2016 promised he would eliminate?
if we're focused on impeachment and we do all these other things, we're not focusing on those things that really matter. Our national debt is one of our biggest risks to this nation, and we need to address that, whether it's this president or the next president. If we do not deal with our national debt, that debt will deal with this country in the form of austerity measures. So we need to look at the things that are driving that. 70% of our spending is mandatory spending, meaning Congress never weighs into this. You know, in the budget fights, we only deal with the discretionary spending. So until we come together as Americans, not as Republicans or Democrats, but come together as Americans and say, we have got to reform these programs, and if we do it now, we'll have time to correct this. But if we don't, that debt is going to be an urgency, and it will be a crisis. And so we've got, in fact, I just introduced Social Security Disability insurance reform that would save approximately $118 billion over 10 years. And it's not so much the amount of savings, it's the longevity of the program that it'll expand so that this debt will come down. And so there's more programs like that we're looking at.
Congressman,
the Republican Study Committee has got a great health care bill coming out. So these are things that will reduce our debt.
Congressman Ted Yoho, appreciate you taking time for us today. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. You have a great day.
You too.
A fire emergency in Northern California. New evacuations underway. Power outages possible for more than 2
This is
million.
right,
A live report
not
from
like
near the scene
20
of the fire.
miles
That's up
from
next.
where I live. Those fires. Our power will be going out later today because of the fire danger. Woohoo! PG&E can suck a dick. Bye.